Hey everyone, it's Horror Free for All, and I hope you're having a great day so far today. I have a review slash ranking video, kind of combined into one, of a TV show that I've been watching through recently, and that is Tales from the Darkside. And I will be talking about Tales from the Darkside Season 2 in this video here. Now, in my previous ranking for Season 1, I said that Season 1 was mostly skippable, and I was going to put a pin on it and tell you what I think about Season 1, more so after I watch Season 2. And after watching Season 2, I'm going to hard stamp that Season 1 is a cherry-picking type of season. You can go and watch my ranking, take my recommendations on the top 12 or so episodes, whatever it was, and just watch those. That season mostly had issues dealing with consistency, and obviously a much lower budget than Season 2 and probably 3 and 4 had. And there was a lot of just, what the fuck did I just watch episodes that kind of clouded that season for me. Now, Season 2 is pretty much landmarks, I would say, better than Season 1 in terms of consistency, quality of stories they chose, and pretty much all across the board more entertaining, and they obviously had a higher budget there too, kind of helping it. But Season 2 does have its issues, where Season 1 kind of had some strengths. Season 1's best episodes had this X factor of like gore and violence in certain episodes that required it. And in Season 2, for the most part, was very tame when it came to that stuff. A lot of things that you think would be included on screen, compared to some of the great stuff from Season 1, like some good gore practical effects, some good body horror elements, that a lot of stuff was done off screen in some of the better episodes of the season, unfortunately. Now, there are some that have some blood in it and some violence in it here and there, but like I said, for the most part, this is a issue for Season 2. But this is a good season in comparison to Season 1. So, like the previous ranking, this season had 24 episodes altogether. From numerical timeline, it goes from episode 25 to episode 48 of the show. The show ran 90 episodes, but there's also 2 never before aired episodes, I think, on the collection set that I had purchased from my collection that I'm using these to watch for my review. So I will include those in Season 4, and also a fan-made episode that's on YouTube in Season 4 as well, to make the total 93. So now that I'm over half the way through of the series, it's kind of bittersweet, but I'm starting to kind of enjoy the show a lot more, and I can finally understand why people hold this show in such high regard. Season 1 did not reflect that for me for the most part. I just thought that was a season, decent at best season, but this season is actually good. So, we're going to look at all 24 episodes in this season, and we're going to rank them from worst to best, from my opinion, right? And the qualities vary in my head on the adjectives I use. There's awful, bad, meh, okay, decent, good, very good, great, and perfect. Spoiler alert, just like Season 1, there's no perfect episode in this season. But there's also no meh episodes, so there's no meh episodes to contribute to Season 1's. And there's no awful episodes either. So the absolute bottom of the barrel that was awful in Season 1, the one episode I put, stands alone by itself. So that's good. Shows the quality and the consistency was for the most part corrected here. But there were 2 bad episodes, and I guess I'll start there. Because these 2, without a doubt, are the worst from Season 2. Alright. At number 24, we have episode 38, Dream Girl. This was a story by Barbara Paul, and I gave this one a 1.5 out of 5 stars. This story was just poorly acted. It's one of those what the fuck did I just watch episodes, very reminiscent to Season 1's what the fuck did I just watch episodes there. But this one just kind of just went a step further than that by just having very shitty scene transitions, poor effects. There's slow-mo shots that have aged so goddamn poorly, you can't help but just laugh at the awkwardness to them. Which I guess is why I put this in the bad and not the genuinely awful. territory because I laughed at it, and at least it had that. It's one of those all for nothing plots. It's a dreamscape with makes no fucking sense. The premise is like this guy, he's treated like shit from this woman, and he traps her in a daydream, and the things that go on in this daydream are so fucking dumb. And the twist might involve somebody else having a daydream, moving all these characters into that. It's fucking terrible, okay? Very skippable episode. You don't need to watch this piece of shit. It's garbage. And then at number 23, we have episode 28, Parlor Floor Front. This was a story by Carol Lucia Citrina. She did like 3 stories from season 1. I think this was the only one she did for season 2. And I gave this one a 1.75 out of 5, which is a step up from Dream Girl, but not by much. Parlor Floor Front is an offensively bad episode. It's very distasteful. There's a lot of fear-mongering against other religious practices such as voodoo. There's some racial stereotyping in this episode, and it doesn't help that the fucking main character is one of the biggest pieces of shit that you'll see in the show. It's just a hard watch. The concept is essentially this. This couple, this woman who's the main character, and her husband, who's a bit nicer than her, have bought this building, but there's a guy that works in the parlor on the floor of the building, and he may or may not be into voodoo, and they go on this spying thing with him and trying to see if this guy is sabotaging their renovation work, and they start going through this moral things of docking his pay, and then they make him feel bad about all this bad shit that's happening to them. And there's a really fucking out there scene involving the man. It may or may not involve suicide, and it actually happens on screen. I'm not fucking kidding. And the acting after that point, it gets very hokey and bad. There's a lot of just really shitty displays of things going on in the second act of the story. And the ending, it does feel like a creep show, a little bit, which is why I put it at least this high. But other than that, it's just a fucking big old piece of shit, too. One of the absolute worst episodes of the whole series that I've seen so far. I hated this one. So that's that. Alright, at number 22, we're starting to enter the okay territory. This was episode 37, Comet Watch. This was a story by Harvey Jacobs. And I give this one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Comet Watch is a fever dream of a fucking story, if I've ever seen one on this show. It should not be as high as it is for me, probably. Some people might be scratching their heads, like, why the fuck is this so high? Or maybe some people might be asking, why is it so low? But I thought the acting performances were good here. The premise, this guy who's not really that connected interest-wise with his current wife, wants to see Halley's Comet come through because it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and she's more self-centered and doesn't really care for that shit. But he decides to, peruse in his attic that has this built-in telescope, and there's this whole story about this guy and his wife and how they acquired the house and the reasons behind it may or may not be involved around this telescope. And people start popping through this fucking telescope as the comet passes by Earth, and there might be some love connection where this guy's contemplating on leaving his wife, and some other characters that come into the story as well to kind of make it weirder, and the story ends on a love note-y way. It's just very hunky-dory, tongue-in-cheek, but, putting the disbelief at the door and some of the shitty, terrible context involved with the story, it's still entertaining. That's why I put it okay. It still made me smile in some aspects of it. So at least I had that going for it. At number 21, we have episode 42, The Old Soft Shoe. This was a story by Art Monterastelli. I gave this one also a 2.5 out of 5 stars as well. This one is very reminiscent to the predictable as shit stories from season 1. And this is no different. The premise is a guy, he's gone to this hotel looking for a room to stay. After interacting with this beautiful woman that he lets cut in front of him, he realizes that he has to pretty much beg the hotel owner to give him the last key of this room the hotel owner really doesn't want him to stay in. But he gets his way and he gets to go stay in the room, but he gets visited by this woman in lingerie, right? And this woman seems to call him by a different name and think that he's a different person. And we as the audience know by numerous context clues of scenes and shots involving a bathroom what's going to be happening to this man by the end of the story. But the story just takes for fucking ever to get to that point. It's very boring. It's just there. It's a boring, predictable one, but it ends on a dark note, and that's why I'm willing to give it this high. It's fun enough. It's a sound concept, just really boring as shit. All right, at number 20, kind of rounding up the okays, we have episode 27, Ring Around the Redhead. This was a story by John McDonald. I gave this one a 2.75 out of 5, which is a step up from the other two. But this one was more hampered by time constraints. Maybe it was too much of an ambitious idea to do on the television show. But I like the style of it. And I like the acting performances for the most part. This concept is really cool. This guy's telling like this court stenographer or court, I guess, true crime writer who's interviewing him in a jail cell, and he's telling all this in past tense about him and his colleague. He found this like really weird volcano with like this ring that can look into other dimensions, and they started fucking around with this volcano, and this man pulled out a woman, like an alien woman, from a different dimension. And the whole episode is about him bonding with this alien, kind of forming a love connection. Yeah, it's hunky-dory, and there's something that involves his colleague, and we get to hear about what his colleague does with the people of where this woman comes from, and something fucked up happens to this guy, but because it's season 2, things are happening off screen. We don't get to see anything of this fucking shit, and that's why this man was put into prison, because it sounds like a ridiculous story nonetheless, and the woman who's taking the story is trying to see if she can believe him, and by the end, there's something there to where now the woman may or may not believe him. So, yeah, the story's more sound. I think the time constraints and the ambition of the story kind of show. Given Tales from the Darkside making a like 20 to 22 minute segment out of this, it needed more time to flesh out the idea. It needed more space to grow the story, and it definitely needed more on-screen things happening, especially with the grisly aspects of it all. It felt like it needed that X factor and more layers added on screen to make this pop higher for me. But some people I know and respect seem to like the concept of the story. It's fine. It's okay to me. Alright, at number 19, we have episode 46, The Unhappy Medium. This was a story by Edith Swinson, and I gave this story a 3 out of 5 stars. Now, The Unhappy Medium kind of starts off the decents for me. Some people might be scratching their heads why I put it this high. But I had a fun time with this one. The concept was kind of creepy. This man who is like a television psychic has died and has left a will to his benefactors. But the 3 people involved, this young woman, this young man, and I guess his ex-wife or sister or something, are looking for the will, and they're trying to see what money from his estate is going to be bequeathed where. But the story goes into this whole paradoxal time shit kind of story, where now there's like this afterlife notion where this man who died has avoided heaven and hell and is kind of in between. And since he's in between, all of his benefactors are going to be in between as well with him. And there's some like body possession shit with some over-the-topness to it, but I like the ADR to it is good for its time, and I like the ridiculous premise to it. And there's a good comeuppance angle with one of the characters who tries to double-cross 2 of them, and you get to see what happens to them. But nonetheless, it was a fine enough story. It was decent. All the interesting aspects of the story were off screen. It's another one of those things, and there are some hokey elements and a lot of disbelief you got to put at the door, but it's fine nonetheless. At number 18, we have episode 40, Printer's Devil. This was a story by Ron Goulart. I also gave this a 3 out of 5 stars as well. And Printer's Devil had a fucking bizarre concept to it, and I think that's why I put it this low. But besides that, it was kind of thought-provoking. This man, he wants to have success in life. He's like a writer, but he's having a lot of trouble in doing so. And him and his wife are kind of struggling. So the man decides to make a deal with this other man who is, for some reason, very morbidly obese. I don't know if the guy's in a fat suit or they picked a very morbidly obese person for this role specifically. But the guy's like a living embodiment of the 7 deadly sins, right? And he makes a deal with this guy. But the contingency is, the deal is supposed to be this. As long as you make animal sacrifices, you will get all the success you can ever want. But you have to do animal sacrifices all the time. And it just goes down that route. It's very bizarre. I like the twist to it all. Near the end where the guy wants his old life back, but there's also another thing he has to sacrifice to get it. And it ends on a fucked up note. But we don't get to really see what happens. It ends on a stinger, unfortunately. But the bizarreness to it, it wasn't my thing. You know, violence on animals, animal sacrifice, and all that shit. Okay. Yeah, it was okay. Another one of those fine ones. But it was more decent because the ending. The ending kind of puts it above the okay. Without that, it would be down there. So yeah, that's that. At number 17, we have episode 47, Fear of Floating. This was a story by Scott Edelman, and I gave this also a 3 out of 5 stars. This one came in the back half of the season, where the blood and gore started appearing. And this one actually had a fun little way of ending the episode. But for the most part, this is one of those stories that I just think were better executed in Tales from the Crypt and in Monsters later on. It's a very similar concept to some stories you'll see from those shows. But nonetheless, these two people that work at an army recruitment station have basically had nothing to do for a long time. Nobody's come in for a while. But then one day this man comes in and he's wearing some bizarre looking shoes and they're excited that somebody's finally walked in. But when they realize what this guy has on him, they ask him to explain what's going on, and he unbuckles his shoes and reveals that he can float. And the two officers think that he's going to be a great government asset and decide to get him recruited to join the army. And the guy's like, okay, I'll do it. Anything to get me away from these people that are chasing me. Well, he comes up with this bizarre lie, and he convinces these officers of one thing, but when you get to know the story, you really figure out who's actually chasing this guy. And the story kind of involves a love note angle with him and one of these officers. And something may or may not happen out of that. And it ends on a fucking weird, hokey ending. More of like a, you know, like a happy gore porn type of way. But it's more hunky-dory than I would want in my Tales from the Darkside episodes or horror anthology episodes, nonetheless. And it doesn't do really anything smart with it. The concept is very much like stuff you'll see, like I said, in Tales from the Crypt and in Monsters. And then when you watch it, you'll know exactly which episodes I'm talking about. But I'll just leave it at that. At number 16, we have episode 25, The Impressionist. This was a story by M. Coleman Easton. I gave this a 3.25 out of 5 stars. Now, this one seems to be a fan favorite from the show. I get it. The monster design is incredible. He's on the back, I think here, right here, the ball sack alien guy here. He was a fun little character. And I like the first half of the story. It involves this man who seems to have a good public presence to him. And people listen to what he has to say. And he's been asked to go to this government facility to talk with this alien who comes from another planet. And he kind of gets this, you know, idea from nonverbal communication, what this alien might be saying. And he's pretty much become the alien whisperer, right? But then it goes in the second half of the story, which is pretty much too hunky-dory, kind of hokey, E.T. the extraterrestrial route, and that's where I'll leave it there. The second half of the story, it just falls apart for me. It starts out great, but ends up in the meh, so it balances out in the decent. But it's a high decent episode. I was entertained, the acting was pretty good, and the monster effects, the ballsack alien, was kind of creepy. But, yeah, that's all I have to say. At number 15, we have episode 41, The Shrine. This was a story by Pamela Sargent. I also gave this one a 3.25 out of 5 stars. Now, I can totally understand if people would put this episode higher. For me, there's a lot of context fuckery going on in this episode that I just can't wrap my head around. A lot of loose things you have to put suspense out the door with. when it's a story rooted in realism, but nonetheless, still a creepy story. This woman has grown dejected from her mother. She hasn't really spent time in her childhood home with her in quite some time, but she finally musters up the effort, I should say, to go visit her. But when she goes to visit her, she learns that something may be living inside of the room that used to be her childhood room. And over the course of the story, this being that might be living in there is pretty much fighting for the existence of whose mother is whose, right? So it forces the older woman to kind of mature and accept, things that she's done wrong in life. And the ending is kind of harrowing, but it puts into perspective this story of coming full circle, and the message there is really powerful, and that's what puts it here, at least at a 3.25 for me. It would be higher if the context was better and less fucking lazy, but nonetheless, very creepy episode. I enjoyed this one. At number 14, this was episode 32. It was called Distant Signals. This was a story by Andrew Weiner, and I gave this story a 3.25 out of 5 stars. Honestly, fundamentally, story-wise, this story was very well executed. The idea was pretty much perfectly done, but the problem is, it's not my speed. I thought this was a decent story. I think it lacked a little more things I wanted to see out of the concept, but nonetheless, like I said, it was pretty much perfectly done for what they did provide. So this man has come to this film studio with a shit ton of money, looking to revitalize this old show that ended like 20 or 30 years ago, this old black and white crime show, and make the final 5 episodes to wrap up the series and give it a proper conclusion. And the producer guy, the production person involved, is down to do it, but now he has to get the writers and the lead actor from the show on board. And when they get on board, this man, he's like, oh, I'm your biggest fan. Where I come from, people love this show, and it means a lot that you're doing this for us. And the people involved are like, why do people care so much about this fucking project? And it's kind of bizarre. And the people, they end up making the stuff for him, and then you realize near the end of what the hell was going on. And it's a very simply put story. I just wish there was more to deal with the reveal about who these people are. Are they from this planet or not? I wish there was more, schlocky effects. I think that actually might have helped this episode for me. But I think the concept was very well done. And it was very smartly woven. Who knows? I think this episode might have potential to go up on a future ranking of mine. I don't know yet. But I'll put it here for now. Just wasn't my speed all the way. Okay. At number 13, we have episode 45 overall, and it's Strange Love. This was a story by Edith Swinson, and I gave this a 3.25 out of 5 stars. This story, by every sense of the imagination, is generic, but it is entertaining as shit. The acting is fun as hell, and the concept is kind of cool too. There's some subtext appeal with the story as well. So this doctor has been called by this couple to go analyze this beautiful woman of this really rich guy. He's like his wife or something. And when the doctor goes there, the rich guy reveals that he's a vampire, and so is his wife. And the doctor ends up getting chained up in the house for a few weeks, but he gets to spend some alone time with the wife, and they get to bond a little bit. And you see these scenes of the guy who's a vampire going out to collect blood and being gone for, a little while. And they come up with this plan to kind of handle her husband. Let's just say that. And the story ends on a very weird and poorly done note, in my opinion. That's what puts it this low. But damn if I would say this episode was entertaining. And it was kind of tense in some aspects. I just... This was the love story I actually liked from the show compared to Ring Around the Redhead. I think this one was just more my speed. Might sound too high for some, might sound too low for some others, but I think number 13, kind of rounding out the top of the bottom half of the season, is fair. Now at number 12, this is the last of the decents for me. We have episode 35, Effect and Cause. This was a story by Michael McDowell. I gave this a 3.25 out of 5. This was definitely one of the more creepier episodes, but despite its creepiness and some original idea aspects to it, just the context is all fucked up, and yeah, there's a lot of weird things going on. But the story is essentially this woman who's an artist. She paints this really fucking creepy painting, and she starts messing around with this painting, and she has like this assistant, this younger guy that teaches art classes with her and stuff. And he's involved in the story, but she's trying to mess around with this painting, but in the process of doing so, she's kind of unlocked this ability where if she tunes out all of her ideas in her brain, she can let reality deconstruct itself. And there's this commentary in the episode about how humans have constructed reality and how reality is only organized by human brains, and if you can turn off the human brain, there would be no rules in reality. And so it's a metaphysical way of presenting the story. There's a lot of loose things that the writers, I think, took liberties of to take advantage of that. But the whole connection with the painting and the reality bending shit never makes sense. And there's a stinger near the end involving the painting that makes no fucking sense because there's no context with it. And that's what puts the story here. It's still a creepy, well done concept. It's just the context is completely missing. So that's why I have it this low in the decent. But it could have been better. Now, my top 11 is pretty much from here on out. These were all standouts. Now, number 11 might shock a lot of you, but hear me out. At number 11, it's episode 29, Halloween Candy. This is written by Michael McDowell, and I give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Aside from the great, creepy monster, I think that was designed by Tom Savini in this episode, and a really great ending, at least in terms of how scary that shit looked. The context, again, is fucked up as shit in this episode, but there is still a semblance of what it was trying to go for there. It does not come like in a neat package. It's just very sloppy when it's put together here, unfortunately. But still a good enough episode, and it definitely creeped me the hell out. So this old man, he hates trick-or-treaters. He has a son who brings him food and is kind of his primary caregiver. And his son leaves him candy to give out to trick-or-treaters just in case he changes his mind and not giving the trick-or-treaters any candy. And after being an asshole for a few hours, he ends up coming across this dimensional being that's like a goblin type of creature that puts him in a hex that keeps him in a time paradox. And there's some really supernatural shit happening in like a potato sack that's a candy bag and shit. And there's a weird angle involving the candy and malnutrition near the end that comes out of fucking left field. That makes no fucking sense. But other than that, yeah, the story was still kind of creepy, and I love the monster design. That definitely added some tension to the story. If it didn't have that, it would be decent or lower. So, I'm sorry if I upset a few of you, but that's just how I feel. Alright, at number 10 is episode 26, Life Bomb. This was a story by Michael McDowell. I also gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This one is held back seriously by how tongue-in-cheek corny some of the shit looks in this episode involving the concept involved. But other than that, I thought this was a fucked up story and I really enjoyed it. So, this man, he has failing health, and he gets approached by this man to do this procedure to where every time he comes close to death, this life preserver kit that looks like a fucking sleeping bag will just encase his whole body and preserve his life, and then it will deflate back down and keep him alive once it knows that the person's alive. But the problem is, throughout the episode, this man, his health is continuously declining and not getting any better, so he's constantly in a state of getting close to death and then being saved and then getting close to death. And then at a certain point, he just wishes he can die already, but there's a consternation involved with the procedure, and that's a really fucked up way that the episode ends it on. Yeah, very, very well done, creepy story. It kind of traumatizes me a little bit. Like I said, the execution is very corny and campy. It kind of takes it back, but I really enjoyed this one. Alright. At number 9 We have episode 33, The Trouble with Mary Jane. This was another Edith Swenson story. This was also a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This, by every stretch, is a farce and a parody episode. It's something that you're not supposed to take seriously, but it does. The episode itself and the story kind of takes itself seriously, which I think kind of holds it back, unfortunately. But this is straight up just making fun of The Exorcist, and I had a ball with it. The concept is these two bumbling exorcist folk who are trying to exorcise this little girl can't seem to get rid of this demon who can do some really funny shit with this girl. She has like a foaming mouth, goat legs, and they try everything in the book they know, every cliche, and then they get pretty much down to the studs on what ideas to do, and they come up with this idea to summon an even bigger, badder demon to take care of this demon inside of this girl, and it ends up backfiring, and it's fucking hilarious. And it goes from there, and there's some comeuppance dealing with these idiots near the end. But the problem with that is that it doesn't lean too much into the humor of it when it should at certain points of the story. I feel like it's kind of it grounds itself a little too much than it should. It should just be over the top, and I think it would have fucking landed perfectly here because the actors really sold the comedy here, and the outrageousness of the plot is just so memorable. I can understand why this might be a favorite for yours out there, but it lands here for me. Okay. At number 8, we have episode 44, A Choice of Dreams. This was a story by Edward Shaver. And I also give this one the same score, 3.5 out of 5 stars. This one is very similar to Life Bomb, but with a different angle to it. This old guy who may or may not have connection to like having a mobster lifestyle, killing people, killing for hire and stuff, is given a terminal illness of cancer, and he's approached by this man to do this procedure where he can pretty much remove his sentience from his physical body that's going to die, and he can live on forever. And the guy's kind of grappling with this option he can do throughout the whole episode. He needs convincing to do it, and the guy tries to convince him, hey, your friends are doing this, hey, your colleagues are doing this. All you have to do is gather $10 million. So the guy eventually starts gathering some money just in case he wants to do it. And he does some really fucking bizarre decisions that come out of left field. Like, why would you kill this person? Why would you do that to keep your money? I don't fucking know. And it's a very convoluted story. But the ending is very impactful because it sends a message, right? And the message is very supernatural. And it recontextualizes the whole story in a smart way. So that's why I put it here. I think it's a better version of Life Bomb. It's a slightly altered version. Not as fucked up, but I think it has a more powerful punch. At number 7, we have episode 30, The Satanic Piano. This was a story by Carl Jacobi. I gave this story a 3.5 out of 5 stars as well. This story has one of the best body horror elements of the whole show, if you ask me. Very cool concept about this man who is a famous musician, and he has a daughter who also plays music, but he's grown so money hungry in his success that he's kind of lost how to be able to put what he's thinking in his head music wise and put it out in the ether into reality. Until one day he comes across this weird instrument maker who may or may not be using satanic rituals to create otherworldly fucking musical instruments, bequeaths him a machine that can transmit his thoughts into actual music where he can hear it and then actually play it later on. And this has some consequences later on, may or may not involving his daughter. And there's a very over-the-top ending with some really gross gore effects, surprisingly, in the episode as well. It had that gore factor going for it, but the problem is the story just didn't go that extra beyond. It wasn't that scary or creepy. It was just played up, kind of safe throughout the whole episode. I think that it needed more ominous things going on with the piano in the episode than what we got. If it had that, I probably would have given this a 4, at least a very good. So, yeah, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But it was a good episode. At number 6, this is episode 39. This is A New Lease on Life. This was an episode written by Adam Jacobs, and I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This one was a very creepy episode for the most part, but it ended on a very fucking schlocky note at the end, and the lack of the lack of X factor and gore in this episode where it could have been used, and some off-screen things kind of held it back for me. But nonetheless, it was a fun story. This guy, he signs a too good to be true lease contract with this landlord lady who has these two workers underneath him that do maintenance work. And there's something wrong with this apartment complex because his neighbor is trying to warn him to leave while he can. And there's some rules and stipulations that he has to follow that are very fucking bizarre while he's living there. And it all comes to fruition when something happens to his neighbor. Then he has dinner with his landlord lady. And then he gets this idea to kind of sabotage these rules, but things backfire on him. And something may or may not happen by the end, in a very schlocky fucking note. It's a fun little creepy story. It just ends kind of on that wet fart note. You know what I mean? You know, it just kind of ends on that note. It needed a powerful punch to send it off, but it was a fun one, nonetheless. Now we're in my top 5. My top 5 episodes from this season were pretty good. These are all 3.75 out of 5s or higher, especially 5 and 4, which are, you know, kind of rounding out just the good here. But at number 5, it might shock a couple people that it's this low, but we have episode 36, Monsters in My Room. This was a story by James Sadwith. Like I said, I gave it a 3.75 out of 5. This had a young Seth Green. They gave a very good performance playing the kid of the story. It reminds me of a story that came way later in Creepshow. It was in season 2. It's called Model Kid. A lot of that episode has some symmetry to this. And I wonder if they took inspiration from this episode. But this one had a fun concept. This boy who has his mom who works late and his stepdad who's always home with him gets into his room early a lot, and he finds himself staying awake in his dark room a lot. And while he's awake and stewing in the dark, he realizes that there's monsters in his room. There's a cackling witch, a scary fucking demon thing in his closet. There's an octopus cracking under his bed, and there's a giant saw blade that whizzes across his room. And he has to learn to conquer these fears on his own throughout the whole episode. And while he tries to tell his stepdad and his mom what's going on, nobody seems to believe him. And something may or may not happen to the stepdad, who's kind of a jerk to him and, you know, physically abuses him and shit. But it happens off screen. Off screen shit again. And the ending is, you know, fine. So, yeah. I mean, this could have been better. I do think this is an overhyped episode from the season, if I'm being honest. It does have its fun moments to it. I like the monster designs and the concepts. Just, it lacks that X factor. It just, why couldn't we see what happens to the stepdad happen on screen? Like, why? Other episodes show plenty of violence and gore. I mean, why not here? I mean, this would have been fun to see. But nonetheless, that's why I put it here. At number 4, we have episode 31, The Dead Fool's Advocate. This was a story by George Romero, and I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. I know a lot of people say this is one of the best episodes from the show, and that might be the case, but for me, the story just didn't go, I guess, where I was expecting it to, and it was kind of too basic for my taste, but it was still a very well done story. It's about this radio talk show host who kind of helps people, or I guess used to in the past, talk people through their issues, has grown jaded over the years, and he's grown tired of trying to help people who aren't willing to help themselves. And it's pretty much an inflection of that, about this man who's gone through a lot of hardships, and you listen throughout the episode in this monologue of this man telling his tragedies and the hardships he's gone through in his adult life to these listeners. You get a sense of where this character's been and why he's grown so jaded. But his listeners have grown to hate him because he's so jaded. And throughout this episode, he's going through these body transformations, and you have no fucking idea why. But there's a revelation near the end that puts it all into context of something that may or may not have happened to the man, and what this man has been going through this whole episode. So, yeah, it was a very entertaining episode nonetheless. It had a great character study layout to it. Great monologue with the character. Just, it just didn't have that oomph factor. There's some decent body horror, I guess, if you want to call it that, dealing with the main character going throughout it the whole episode. But nonetheless, it's a higher end good episode. Just does not hit that very good territory for me. Now, my top 3 are easily my favorites from this season. And my number 3, if it wasn't for fucking Goosebumps spoiling this formula ad nauseum, I would have probably enjoyed this more. This episode would have fucking scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. It's episode 34, Ursa Minor. This is a story by John Sladek, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. This is entering the very good territory. This is very much the formula you're probably accustomed to in Goosebumps. Kid acquires a toy. Toy does mischief that gets kid in trouble. Parents may or may not get involved or believe said kid, but then there's a revelation dealing with the toy that the toy's alive, and the toy's been doing this all along, right? This is no different than that. That's essentially the story you're going to get out of this, except it's a fun little twist to it all. The parents are more involved. You have this couple with a daughter who has been given a teddy bear by the dad. The dad has a taxidermy bear down in the basement that may or may not be possessing this teddy bear and causing it to come alive and act like a real fucking bear from Goldilocks and the Three Bears legend. And it's kind of corny at some points of the story. That's what kind of holds it down. And you don't really get to see what kind of fucking spiritual monster this thing is at the very end, because it ends on a stinger with the arm coming through the door. But this episode is fucking creepy. And there's a reason why this formula has been done so much across so many different horror IPs. It's because it works. But I like the twist angle to it, and I like the creativity it kind of spins on it. And, yeah, this was just a very enjoyable episode. It just held back by some corniness and the lack of seeing the monster. Whatever the fuck the thing is near the end. But, good one. Very good one. Alright, my top 2. Some people might be pissed that I put this on my number 2, but it's a fucking very good episode, y'all. I'm not saying it isn't. It's very good for a reason. It's episode 43, The Last Car. This was a story written by Michael McDowell. And I also gave this story a 4 out of 5 stars. This story was very creepy. It's one of the creepiest episodes of the whole show. You have this girl trying to go home for holiday break. She ends up on this train that comes late, and there's only 3 other people in the car. A little boy that likes to shoot, play guns, and dress up in different costumes. This old lady that likes to knit. And this guy who's very quiet that likes to eat snacks out of this box. And she hasn't been able to see the conductor of the train to rip her ticket yet. And she learns bits and pieces of what the fuck this car is throughout the whole story. And there's this talk about this car going through tunnels, and what the tunnels do to the people on the train is fucking insane. And the tunnels are kind of a metaphor for like, hey, when you go through the tunnel, you can like warp reality and shit. And there's a big old revelation near the end that the character comes to, and it's kind of sad and morbid, but it's very hokey in its delivery, and that's what kind of holds it back for me. You know, the schlockiness doesn't kind of add anything to the story. You know what I mean? It's just kind of there just to be like a thing for shock value. And as well, it's very predictable. You can almost guess exactly what angle they're going to go with in the story. There are some unpredictable twists and turns. There are some really captivating acting performances, though, that kind of bolster it up above that. And I can totally understand why people say that this is one of the best episodes of the show. It is. It's one of the best. But it's not my number 1 of the season. My number 1, this is the only great episode, in my opinion, from this season. It's episode 48, The Cassavin Curse. This was a story by Edith Swenson, and I give this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This story felt the most like Creep Show in the whole season, and I loved how batshit the story got. Even though it's a more simple tale about this family who was cursed by a gypsy woman hundreds of years ago, and now the blood relatives later on now have to reap the consequences of this curse that may or may not be impacting their love relationships of this man and this woman. And the opening of the episode is fucking what the hell. It's so shocking and it's so creepy, and it sets the tone for the whole episode, y'all. This woman, she apparently in like a stupor, murders her lover, the person she's in love with, and it's very grisly, very bloody. There's blood everywhere. There's a dead body laying there with stab marks in his back. It's very fucking disgusting. And the police get involved, and the investigation gets involved. Her cousin gets involved. And essentially, they start putting two and two together that this must be the curse that's been plaguing the family for over 100 years, going all the way back to one of the relatives that divorced a gypsy woman. And there's this other character that comes into the story that plays a pivotal role, and you'll learn what that person is and who they might be related to near the end of the episode as well. But it is a creepy, well-done episode. There's great makeup effects. Like I said, great gore effects as well to boot. This is definitely the best episode in my opinion. It swings for all the fences. It does kind of miss the mark in some areas. I think the story's a little too rushed and needs more time to flesh out the story. And the acting performances from certain characters in the story do kind of weigh it down a little bit, especially near the back half of the episode. But I would dare say that the Cassaman Curse is my favorite Season 2 episode, one of the most overlooked and underrated episodes of the Tales from the Darkside show. And, yeah, I mean, it's a fun time. It's a great episode. It's in my top 3 so far. And, yeah, it's one of those that I think why I love it so much is because I can tie it to Creepshow in some ways too, which doesn't hurt. It's just a really great one. This is the absolute one that you have to see from this season, in my opinion. So yeah, that's my ranking / review of Tales from the Darkside Season 2. Let me know down in the comment section, what was your favorite episode? What was your least favorite episode? Do you agree with some of my takes? Do you not agree? How would you rate the season? How would you go about doing that? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.